Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I warmly welcome everyone today from wherever you may be joining us today. It's a privilege to have you with us for another insightful episode of Technovation with Ahmad Javaid, where we dive into the most pressing and timely topics shaping the technological landscape, which is ever changing. Today, we venture into the realm where the lines between science fiction and reality blur, a world where everyone move, both in the digital and physical spheres, is subject to the constant scrutiny and analysis. The rise of sophisticated surveillance technologies presents us with profound ethical dilemmas, forcing us to confront a fundamental question which every one of us should ask: how much of our privacy we are willing to give away in the pursuit of security. So, to navigate this complex terrain, I'm honored to be joined by a distinguished panel of thought leaders and industry experts who will dissect the evolving nature of surveillance technologies and their ethical ramifications in the public domain. So let's begin by welcoming our esteemed panelists, and I would like to kindly request all of our guests to introduce themselves. I mean, let's begin with inviting Barrister Sahar. Would you kindly introduce yourself, please?
Ji, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Barrister Sahar. I'm a corporate lawyer and a partner at Akhund Forbes, which is a top-ranked law firm in Pakistan.
Welcome, welcome. Pleasure to have you, Sahar. And then we have our next panelist, Mr. Ghulam Shabbir Sahab. Would you kindly introduce yourself, sir? Sir, you're on mute. Ghulam sir, I'm not able to hear you. Minutes, you're mute.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Ghulam Shabbir. I am from the practice and learning fraternity of public policy design, analysis, and governance reforms alongside organizational transformation. And I'm doing it from last 23 years.
Pleasure, sir. Pleasure to have you. And we're going to be engaging with the audience to learn from you today. Our last and a very strong personality on the field, industry thought leader, Mr. Azhar-Rehman Sahab. Would you kindly introduce yourself, please?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Azhar Zia-ur-Rehman. Presently, I am a governance consultant. I've got about 46 years in the industry. I've worked in technology, in manufacturing, in many areas. I worked in about 20 countries over the last 46 years.
So having such a vast experience and knowledge, we'll definitely looking forward to learn more, deeper insights of the topic today. So today we brought yet another very relevant and important topic of the ethical dilemmas of evolving surveillance technology. Today we live in such world, in a place where we definitely coming back to that position where we need to where another answer this question, or will be asked this question, that how much of our privacy we are willing to give away in the pursuit of security. So let's start by throwing my first question. How would you like to define this evolving surveillance technology? Let's start from Barrister Sahar, if you would like to answer.
I think I'll answer slightly differently given my field. So let me address this question by saying, how does the legal framework, or does the legal framework in Pakistan talk about surveillance technology? Now, at the outset, I would like to mention that we don't have a concrete or a specific piece of legislation which governs surveillance technology. There are a patchwork of laws and regulations that address data privacy, data protection, national security. My answer is going to be slightly sort of detailed given the nature of this topic, but perhaps from that you can then move on to your other panelist. So the legal framework needs to, and as you rightly said, it needs to strike a balance between surveillance and protecting individual rights, the right to privacy. Our constitution, the Constitution of Pakistan, Article 14, guarantees dignity of man and privacy of home. And from so that's where our right to privacy emanates. Even if we don't have any other law, if we feel that technology is it's interfering with our right to privacy, we can always bring a constitutional petition in the court and use Article 14 of our constitution. But then we have other laws as well. So as you know, the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority is probably the key regulator when it comes to technology. We also have the FIA, Federal Investigation Agency, but the Pakistan Telecommunication Agency, under its own PTA Act and Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, regulates this area to a large extent. What I would like to mention here is, and I think we've spoken about this in one of CXO's other podcasts and webinar, is that unfortunately in this day and age, Pakistan does not have a data protection law. We've had a data protection bill, which has been passed for comments and feedback. It's been a number of years, but it has not seen the light of the day. It has not been published. It has not been promulgated as a statute of our parliament. Why is that? Maybe because for the last few years we were busy tackling other issues, the pandemic and then floods, changing governments. So it's a little disappointing that this very important piece of legislation has not seen the light of the day. In fact, the reason why it's more disappointing is normally, as you know, Pakistan used to be a British colony. And we follow a lot of British law. So we have a lot of legacy laws that we inherited from the United Kingdom. And normally, when India passes a certain piece of legislation or statute, Pakistan follows suit. In this case, India, I think last year, promulgated its data protection law. And we were hoping, the legal fraternity in Pakistan and other stakeholders were hoping that Pakistan would also finally publish the bill, which has been available online for everybody for a number of years now. Hopefully, maybe this year. I'm not very optimistic, but hopefully this year, because we really need it. And especially given that we as a nation we've really opened up to the world in terms of freelancing and working remotely for international clients. Whether it's European client, whether it's an American client, the first question they always ask is about data protection privacy. And we tell them, oh, there are bits and pieces and fragments of legislation, but nothing concrete. And we tell them we have this bill. It might see the light, it might see the dawn of the day any day. So just keep this in mind. Other than that, and I'll quickly wind up, we have the Fair Trial Act, which which does talk about surveillance and interception of communication, but that is in certain cases. So investigation for fair trials, investigation under the fair trial rules. And of course, we have our intelligence agencies who who mostly conduct surveillance. Now, there are some concerns, which I'm sure we'll discuss later in today's podcast. So I'll stop here for now because there is more to think about. But Ahmed, I'd like to hand the floor over back to you and to other panelists.
Thank you very much, Sahar, for painting the landscape and the legal framework within Pakistan. And definitely, surveillance technology is not a new topic, and it is basically, as it's evolving, it's bringing and the related concerns are growing along with that. And let's hear from the other panelists as well. So Ghulam Sahab, your please your take on this thing. That please, if you would like to define the surveillance technology in your own good words, and you know, first of all, starting from this fundamental question that why do we need to have this kind of surveillance done?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ahmad Javaid sahab. In fact, this is basically the need of the hour, the need of the moment, we can say. And we all know that there have been many socio-technical, forces, which, as well as political forces, which have actually been shaping up this entire era for the surveillance technologies, and it it has actually many kind of manifestations. But however, nonetheless, now it is basically considered as one of the fundamental strategy or one of the fundamental outfits that certainly a country or a county within a country, or for that matter, a town within a country, has to actually set up for the safety, security, reduced vulnerability of the citizens or the residents or the populations of the area, for example. So, from predictive, from like kind of predictive from kind of security specific measures to predictive measures, and from predictive measures to prescriptive measures, I mean, it has now been evolving, and it has now actually become the norm. So any technology or any mechanism for that matter that we use to ensure security, that we use to prescribe about the safety of our people as well as the assets or the collaterals that we have, it is basically, I mean, labeled as a surveillance technology. So that's what it is. It's quite a wide-ranging phenomena, quite wide-ranging apparatus that is actually involved, and hence the ecosystem for this entire thing is too big as well. It involves from a single individual to the entire state as an apparatus around it. So that's how it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ghulam sir, for highlighting the very important aspects of it. Yes, indeed, its ecosystem is so wide, and where law enforcement agencies, the governments, and other actors actually get involved in that. So let's hear Azhar sir, your view, please, on this thing. That how would you like to define this surveillance technology in your own good words?
Okay, thank you very much. When we define something, we have to look at what components have to be included in a definition. So let's see what components should be included in the definition of surveillance technology. The first component is the purpose. What should be the purpose of surveillance, of surveillance technologies? That's the first element. The second element that has to be included is the tools and systems that can be used, or that should be used, or that are used in surveillance technology. This includes CCTV cameras, biometric systems, internet and digital monitoring tools, IoT sensors, drones, and so on. The third part that has to be included in the definition has to be the methods that are allowed to be used, that are used, or that can be used. The fourth aspect should be the applications, because all of this has to come together using applications. So what kind of applications are to be used for in surveillance technology? The fifth element has to be ethical and regulatory. What ethics have to be practiced, and what regulatory covers have to be there or considered. So these are the 5 parts. Now, if we bring all of these together, probably I'll coin the definition something like this. I'll say that surveillance technology is the use of, number 1, hardware, number 2, software, and number 3, data-driven systems. So hardware, software, and data systems to do what? To monitor, record, and analyze what? Information about individuals. So that 3 parts: hardware, software, data-driven systems. They are used to do what? To monitor, record, and analyze what? Information about individuals, groups, or environments. Now, that this covers probably 3 of the 5 components. The other components can be covered as its applications range from enhancing security. So why are we doing it? Number
Mhm.
one, enhancing security. Number two, ensuring compliance. Compliance to what? Compliance to optimizing public services. But doing this, should we be careful about? We should be careful about ethical oversight to balance privacy and societal benefits. So the ethical part is there to balance privacy and societal benefits. So too much of privacy may not be good for societal benefits. Too much of societal benefits may not be good for somebody's privacy. So this is the definition that I'll probably like to coin.
No, absolutely. You spotted on the bullseye, and that's exactly, I mean, the way you have provided the bisection of this surveillance technology, and the purpose and the need for it is absolutely is a need of the time, to be known by each and every individual which is under such of the surveillance mechanisms and the surveillance technologies. So let me take the discussion forward with by relating with the legal frameworks which Barrister Sahar have highlighted and mentioned. But sir, what, in your opinion, what's are the common ethical concerns, whether it is more legal within the legal framework or outside, currently these days has been commonly, like, highlighted or pointed out?
Well, I think the concerns, as I previously mentioned, the lack of a robust legal framework also gives rise to ethical concerns. And Azhar Saab mentioned the purpose. Why do we need surveillance technology? He mentioned security reasons. We also need it. I mean, it's a little ironic that we need surveillance technology to enforce law and also for administrative purposes. But at the same time, we need to be, or the authorities who are using surveillance technology also need to be very careful that their use of technology firstly does not overstep the boundaries of the law, what they've been permitted to do under the law, and ethical concerns. Um, I don't know to what extent I should, mention this, but I think maybe it was Ghulam Saab who mentioned that over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of political concerns in how surveillance technology is being used. And I think the reason for that concern is that we lack um, an, an authority which can oversee the use of surveillance technology. Now, there's another question. Even if we have that authority, to what extent will that authority be different from our current authorities? And to what extent can it independently monitor surveillance technology? So the concerns are both, in short, the concerns are both legal for lack of a robust legal framework, and also ethical in that the use of surveillance technology, we do know that boundaries are overstepped on many occasions. I should also mention our judiciary. So we have the parliament, we have the laws, we have authorities, we have different government departments, the police, etc., who use intelligence service, who use this technology. But then we also have our judiciary, and the judiciary is one of the three independent arms of the state. And the judiciary's role, again there are people who criticize the judiciary for overstepping their role, but I think in a country like, in a country like ours, we need sort of checks and balances. So the judiciary has also taken cognizance of the use of surveillance technology. People have approached the court, and because our, I think, in the region, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but our judiciary is known to be very independent and very bold. So they take a lot of actions on their own. And surveillance technology is also one of the areas in which the judiciary has cast its eye on, and noted that sometimes there are concerns with the use of surveillance technology.
So what's your take on this? Like, would you agree with me that the judiciary itself should take a lead in defining and establishing the accountabilities of the usage of the surveillance data?
So the answer is no. And the reason for that is the judiciary's role is not to define. I mean, historically, the judiciary's role is not to define, which is why sometimes people criticize the judiciary for trying to make laws. It is the parliament, because the parliament comprises of comprises people who have been voted in power. We're a democratic country. Our candidates who have won the elections are sitting in the parliament. It's their job to make the law. It's the judiciary's job to interpret the law. And in interpreting the law, they often define or clarify and expand laws as well, which is something that happens in every country. Well, not every country, but in a country like ours where our judiciary is very active. So they, by giving decisions in cases, they set precedents. Of course, that precedent can later be overturned by a superior bench of the court or the same bench. But to answer your question, technically, it's not the judiciary's role to define the law, it's the parliament's role. Often, our judiciary finds itself defining laws, but they have a lot of their own work to do.
Yeah, so let's take the opinions from Ghulam Sahab and Azhar Sahab as well, because in my opinion, it's more yes, parliament role is important in defining the governance related to it, and accountabilities is yet part of it. So Ghulam Sahab, let's help me please crack this puzzle, of who should take what responsibility in legislating and define, these matters of who should own that technology, what type of technology, and who should be able to access that surveillance data.
Actually, I mean, by design of our institutional structure, as well as the organizations which are actually responsible for upholding the overall, constitution. So yes, Sahar has a very clear viewpoint on this. There is no other thought that Parliament has to be the entity or the institution in charge to prepare these kind of regulations. Now, this is basically the constitution that says so. However, we all know that we are struggling with a number of incapacities within our institutions at every level. Hence, our governance and other related elements uh, are not in place in a disciplined way. So we have not been able to see legislation on many digital fronts. I would label ours as ours is a barren country when it comes down to legislation related to digitalization, surveillance, and these very, very, sensitive topics. So here the solution is a strong, co-working relationship or a strong collaborative relationship across many, many actors of our country, including parliament, including judiciary at large, as well as the private sector, the existing regulators, especially the regulators who are being part of the ecosystem, either the ecosystem related to deployment or related to regulation of the overall surveillance activities. So it is basically altogether a collaborative effort, and one has to drive this entire legislation regime through a single-minded focus for through this collaboration, so that we can not only understand that what kind of legislative scrutiny do we require, but also what kind of new legislation we need to bring in. So now, again, there are two specific components of the new legislation that we require. One is the element that we take care of the new legislation required from the perspective of our own, population, of our own, what you say, I mean, people, and for our own country, actually, right? In terms of the constitutionally provide constitutionally, proven powers or constitutionally supported powers to the general public of Pakistan. Then there is another element, and that is basically when it comes down to our relationship or our relevance with other countries, other global standards, or other regional standards for that matter. So that is another layer of legislation. So we have a lot of responsibility. This is an area which have not been able to get many of the attention, but it requires a lot of collaborative effort, and it requires a lot of very, very sinful brains to devise these kind of legislation and to take this case forward actually.
Thank you, Ghulam sir. I mean, it's quite comprehensive, like you point. So, because Azhar sir, your take on what has been said here, please.
Uh, well, as far as legislation is concerned, we have to first decide who is responsible for what. See, when you talk about AI consists of two basic things. One is data, and one is the logic, the algorithms. So, who is responsible for data? By law, NADRA is supposed to be responsible for data. But which data? Are they responsible only for data on humans, or are they responsible for all data? So that has to be settled first, that who is responsible for what data. Number two, who is responsible for the quality of data? You cannot have NADRA responsible for data as well as the quality of data, because that will be a conflict of interest. So there has to be somebody more intelligent who can decide on the quality of data. Then who will be the owner of the data? The different owners of data will be across different ministries, different organizations. So that has to be defined. And people have to own data and be stewards of data. So all of these things have to be decided by law. So that's the first level of legislation that has to be done. The second legislation will be how to use that data. Who will use that data and how? Who is responsible? Who is allowed to do what with data? That has to be defined. So all of these, this is not a problem in Pakistan only. This is a problem worldwide. And I've been working in the Gulf for about how many 35 years, and they have gone through 3 or 4 iterations of the same, and they can't decide whom to make responsible for what. And they've gone through these iterations at a very expensive cost. We in Pakistan cannot afford that. We cannot have 3 or 4 iterations of the same thing and make mistakes every time and then redo things again. So we have to be very clear. Somebody at the top, probably the cabinet. This has to be done at the cabinet level. The cabinet has to be made responsible for deciding the responsibilities without conflict of interest, and then the laws can be made accordingly. So this is what I think in this regard.
Yeah, but as I said, one important thing which we have highlighted is, like, as part of, like, today systems are becoming more and more intelligent, and yes, data is like acts like a blood, in veins, which moves in their veins. So when you are saying, like, we need to have a proper data governance, rules and responsibilities properly defined, that who should own that data and who should be act as a steward and who should be access right to that data. The more important relevant is, like, how to address the AI algorithmic biases, and just to avoid the discriminations as part of, that process of developing and deploying these surveillance technologies.
So what is your question? I didn't get your question.
So my question is, like, who should be, how to address these algorithmic bias while developing these AI solutions related to surveillance technologies?
Okay, first of all, there has to be uh, rules, or there has to be we have to define the areas of ethical complexity, of areas where ethics have to be defined. Now, what I'm doing, my book, which is coming out hopefully next month, I will define how many 1,941 activities of AI ethics. And
Right.
for each of those 1,941 activities, I'm in the process of defining KPIs for them. And how to measure those, the majority of those activities, I've defined very detailed procedures based on ISO 33001. So once this is done, then you'll be able to know the ethical maturity of an application or an individual or an organization, and you'll be able to certify that this application or this part of this application is ethically mature at level 2 out of 5, 0 to 5. So that's a standard scale. Or you can say that this whole application, parts of this application are mature to a level 4 or level 3, but this whole application is mature only to a level 1. Or this whole organization, the maturity of this whole organization is at level 1, although some of its applications are at level 4. So this is the way how it will be done. And nobody in the world is doing this. Hopefully, when my book is out next month, there'll be some movement in this regard.
Perfect. So that basically explains the very, the challenge of those companies who are developing and offering these surveillance related technologies, that they need to make sure that, the government related policies needs to be complied with. And of course, that needs to be the technologies which have been brought into the market and been offered in the public needs to be first certified. And thank you so much, Azhar Saab, for your contribution into the community. And definitely your book will be well read off. I will be one of the reader very soon, inshallah. And just taking the discussion forward, to my next question to Barrister Sahar is like, how do you see that, you know how to maintain that balance for the need in the public safety for the fundamental right of the privacy? Because as what we are discussing, like, the usage of this surveillance technology, that is one aspect of it, and then the data, the surveillance information itself, whether it is been collected through the CCTV cameras or monitoring your internet traffic or through the drones or whatnot. So how to maintain or achieve a level of balance?
I think in answering this question of yours, I will also touch upon the responses given by Azhar Saab and Ghulam Saab just now. So Azhar Saab, very excited to hear about your book. It's great that as a Pakistani you've written it, and you mentioned that, and I think Ahmed, this answers your question partly as well. Azhar Saab mentioned that laws need to address these points, and he listed a number of them. To some extent, the draft data protection law does address that. It talks about what constitutes data, who owns it, how can it be used, saved, etc., processed. And Ghulam Saab mentioned, and I do not disagree, as a common person, as a layman, I do not disagree that if we think our institutions are do not have the capacity or the competence to do their job, which has been mandated by the constitution, then certain other institutions need to step in. And we've seen that happen, but that also, again, I don't want to go into that, but that also results in a collision between institutions. But Ahmed, you mentioned that this particular sector is evolving so rapidly that our decades old laws need to be significantly updated to keep in line with the ever evolving and changing landscape. um, and as far as maintaining a balance is concerned, I think the starting point is the law. The laws need to be extremely detailed, um, not just so. How the hierarchy of laws work is that there is an act of parliament, and then there are subordinate legislation, which we call rules, regulations, etc. So all this needs to be set out in, because see, the law is passed by the parliament, right? And every time you need to amend an act of the parliament, it's a cumbersome process. So if you have rules and regulations, that can be more easily amended. And as Azhar Saab said, I mean, stakeholders like Azhar Saab or other thought leaders who have spent considerable time and knowledge in this area, they need to be advising the government. And I'm sure the government does have advisors, but we also need to look around the world. And I think one of our panelists said that this is a challenge which is faced by other countries as well, the most advanced and developed countries. But we can still look at the practices they're following, and then consider how that can work within our own ecosystem, and then adapt and adopt it. But there is so starting point is law, and also training and a lot of awareness needs to be conducted in all departments who have any relevance to surveillance technologies, because for them it's new as well, right? So what happens in Pakistan is a lot of us don't even know all the laws of the country, which is why now what we are seeing is that if a law is passed, then whoever is responsible for implementing, overseeing that law, they need to be trained. And they don't necessarily need to be trained by lawyers or the government. They need to be trained by experts like yourselves, like our panelists here, so that they understand what the law is saying, what it's supposed to do, and how they're supposed to do their own job. So, law, continuous training. I think that that's probably the easiest step to take.
No, certainly, and that's a very important point you highlight in terms of like spreading the awareness about the, the fundamental rights of the public in terms of challenging if such situations where their privacy is breached, and on top of it, like the establishing the right governance. Of course, the legislation is not, is one of the core foundation which we need to do. But Ghulam Sahib, how do you think, like now, since the thing which I'm perceiving is like, when we are as a nation, we are, yes, we are a bit efforts a bit delayed from the regulators in terms of is regulating these kind of like initiatives. But would you like to shed some light on that? Recently I heard about our Minister of IT has presented a bill of digital nation, act, by our her excellency Sheza Fatma, Minister of IT. When and I would assume that most of these parts are being considered in terms of like when our government services are being modernized and getting aligned with the technological evolution. Our legislation part is as well needs to be come join the efforts hand in hand. How do you see all this thing coming up?
Um, this digital nation, Pakistan Digital Nation Bill, actually is a welcoming step in order to take this entire, digital transformation to the new level. However, the problem or the challenge is, as Azhar Saab has already mentioned, that even in the countries who have been experiencing this entire digital transformation or provision of digital services, including surveillance as well, to their citizens as well as their assets, I mean, they have gone through rigorous iterations, and they have learned their lessons the hard way. But unfortunately, in our case, since the world has seen a lot of developments, and there is already a significant level of maturity in introducing these kind of legislation, and then aligning the institutional as well as the governance structures at the country levels with these kind of legislations. I mean, this it has seen certainly a level of maturity. But the bill itself does not reflect that depth and width which can actually draw upon the existing maturity or the existing experience and learning of the developed the nations, or for that matter, the nations who have already been able to, handle this element within their countries, or within certain parts of, their governance structures. Nonetheless, this is a positive direction altogether. However, um, this is a very highly integrated subject, for example. And this subject can only be materialized when there is a seamless collaboration, and when there is a single-minded focus kind of a commitment across major stakeholders, especially those who are related to legislating these areas, regulating these areas, as well as governing these areas. And I mean, so at the first stage, it requires at least a kind of a single-minded focus across the stakeholders on on the helm of affairs. So now there is actually an other dimension, and that is basically the enforcement. Be it the enforcement of this, bill, or be it the enforcement of other legislations that we will actually be requiring to join the ranks for this national digital nation bill. So we actually need to be very, very focused in terms of bringing in the other requisite legislation as well as the other requisite, regulation on the board. Because, for example, if we talk of data, now the questions which have been raised by Azhar Javaid Saab a couple of minutes before are very fundamental, pertinent, and highly significant questions. So if we don't have legislation around, and if we have the legislation for that matter, but we don't have the enforcement mechanism around, and if we have an enforcement mechanism per se, but we don't have the capacity around, so then what good that legislation would be actually, and what kind of purpose it would be, sufficiently serving for the people as well as for the institutions of this country, as well as for those with whom we interact cross borders for various activities and various kind of works. So transparency, uh, legislative majority, regulatory maturity, pulling in of ethical considerations, pulling in of single-minded focus on governing all these initiatives through very well knitted and through very well refined legislative maturity actually is the way forward. Then there is another thing. I mean, we have not been very astute when it comes down to standardization of digitalization of, for example, or standardization of these all technologies and the mechanisms that are actually involved around these technologies. So I mean, whenever we have standardized something, we have done that standardization not for the sake of standardization and quality assurance, and bringing in transparency and promoting accountability, or adhering to the ethical considerations. We have always been fond of standardization when it comes only when we have required, when somebody has required it from us. So FATF is the most recent case in point in our history, right? So we need to actually learn from our history. We need to actually learn from the history or from the developments of other nations who have done this successfully. With a lot of experimentation, and with a lot of cost associated with that experimentation, not too far away in the past. And then we need to realign ourselves with respect to the indigenized needs of the day, as well as with respect to focusing on the future that we are trying to chase for ourselves as well as for our coming generations. So that's where it actually leaves us on.
That's certainly, Ghulam, so I fully agree with you that when all these efforts needs to be strategized and streamlined by keeping our, the core purpose and the destination in mind. Without that effort, the efforts related to the legislation will not be fruitful in terms of bringing all the stakeholders on board. And definitely, since we have already discussed a lot about the legislation, governance, and but you highlighted a very two important aspects which I would like to take Azhar Saab's comment on. That is that, Azhar Saab, in your opinion, what mechanisms from a technology perspective as well, is that what mechanisms are necessary to ensure the transparency and the accountability in the use of these surveillance related technologies, particularly by governments and the private entities are involved these days as well? If you kindly unmute yourself, you're still on mute. We are not been able to hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said what mechanisms are required.
Yeah.
Uh,
For
I think
transparency and accountability. Yeah.
yeah. The first mechanism, as we discussed just now, is clear policies and frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
Policies about data, policies about who's responsible for what, and frameworks to implement that. So that's the first thing. That has to come from the government. So that's the first thing: clear policies and frameworks. Second thing is independent oversight bodies. You've got the frameworks, you've got the laws, you've got everything, but is it being implemented as they were supposed to be implemented? So you must have independent oversight bodies. And when I say independent, I really mean independent. They should not be under government control. They should be independent of government control. They should be independent of political control. They should be independent of control by influential people, influential bodies, and so on. So that's the second thing. Oversight. The second thing is independent oversight bodies. The third one is transparency reports. What is being done, because AI needs transparency in its data and it needs transparency in its algorithms. So there must be transparency reports by the organization itself and by independent bodies on the transparency of the data that is being used and on the transparency of the algorithms that are being used. So that makes three things. The fourth thing, that is public consultations and stakeholder engagement. Whoever are the stakeholders for an application, for an organization, or for a certain data, those stakeholders have to be engaged, and their feedback has to be taken. And of course, that includes public consultation also. The fifth aspect is impact assessments, and these should be mandatory. Impact of what? Impact of a certain application before it comes out. What will be the impact of a certain application on different parts of the society, on different aspects of the society? So these should be mandatory, that before an application is released, its impacts have to be studied and assessed and made public. The sixth thing is consent and notification mechanisms. Consent by whom? Consent by the individuals or by the groups whose data is being used. Did they give consent to the use of their data? Did they give consent for specific types of uses of their data? So the consent has to be very specific, and the consent has to be very clear, and the consent has to be retaken periodically, because whenever you think of making a new use of that data, a new set of consent has to be taken. So that's the sixth one. The seventh one is accountability. And how is accountability done? Accountability can be done through audit trails. That who is using the data and the algorithms for what? Who is modifying the data? Who is modifying the algorithms? Who is using the application for what? The application was meant for A, B, C, D, E, but he is using it for F and G. Was that allowed? Were the permissions taken by the subjects for the use of data for those for those purposes? So accountability should be there through audit trails. The next one is mechanisms to redress to redress the complaints. People may find out that a certain system is being used for the wrong purposes, and they have complaints. How will you redress those complaints? How will you make sure that those complaints are taken care of and covered in the right way? The next mechanism will be bias audits. There will be biases in data, and there will be biases in the algorithms. Now, these bias audits have to be done at the time of the design and the launch of the application, but these should be regular, every year probably, or even sooner, because as the data changes, as the data grows, as the algorithm is used more and more, it becomes more and more intelligent. So it is liable to develop bias. So having a biased audit at the beginning is not enough. You must have regular biased audits. The next aspect would be real-time monitoring and alerts. As the application is being used, it has to be monitored in real time, and alerts have to be generated for wrong use or for wrong changes of data collection methods or wrong or outdated permissions for the use of data. So real-time monitoring is very important. Another one is whistleblowing protections. We do have in some organizations whistleblowing mechanisms, but those whistleblowing mechanisms are not very secure. The person who blows the whistle often faces problems. We must have mechanisms for whistleblowing and mechanisms for protecting the whistleblowers. Another mechanism could be certification programs, training and certification programs of the people who develop AI applications, of the people who design AI applications, and the people who use AI applications. So training and certification programs. Another one could be periodic review and updates of applications. Then we can have now a new breed of technology is coming up, which is privacy enhancing technologies, which is based on the standards of privacy and the laws of privacy. So what are the technologies that can be used to enhance privacy? So these are some mechanism that, in my view, can be used for enhancing, for monitoring the use of AI applications.
I think justice to say that these are not some, they are quite a lot, and that's a very rightfully. I think you laid down the very foundation of ethical, guidelines for the government and the related stakeholders to follow as a golden rules to define such systems. So, but that's why. Let me push forward the discussion to bring the legal aspect of it. So, Sahar, what's your take on this thing? Like, we do have still ethical challenges as far as we are dealing with humans and individuals, citizens, and all that. So, as other subs said, like, we need to have a proper transparency and accountability while designing these systems. However, still, what's in your opinion that who should go and do the oversight on the law enforcement agencies who are primarily are the users of this kind of a data, what don't give any sort of attention to that, they need to collect a consent or those kind of things. So how do you help me solving this problem?
Well, firstly, Azhar Saab gave a very comprehensive and detailed response, and he touched upon two things: transparency reports, and the need to have an independent body which will oversee the law, which is something I mentioned earlier as well. And just to circle back, Ahmad, on your question, you mentioned the Pakistan Digital Act, which was recently in December 2024. It was passed. You also very rightly mentioned that it's a very good step. It's very positive, but it's a bit delayed. And so, just to add to that, I think since the last decade, we've seen a lot of policies, especially the PTA, Pakistan Telecommunication Authority. Back in the day, they published a lot of guides and policies which do not have the force of law, but which can still.
I think we lost the barrister, sir. So, Ghulam Sahab, would you like to continue on the same question and same direction that, what should we do in terms of ensuring that, even the law enforcement agencies who are the right first users of these surveillance data and surveillance information, who should or have an authority to oversight them to ensure the transparency and fairness of the data?
Sorry, my apologies. Am I back on?
Yes, you're very much back. Welcome.
I think there was a power breakdown. So we've seen, and this is a decade ago, we saw a lot of policies laws being passed. But the problem was, and this will answer your question, the problem was we had a difference of opinion between governments. So a government, and the interesting thing is, the people who actually draft these laws are the same. So they come up with very good laws. The government in power will pass it. The new government will come and they'll change it. Why? Not because it was a bad piece of legislation, because of political differences. For that reason, we were not able to see laws being implemented. In the sense, we spoke about the need for an authority or an independent body which will oversee all this. The reason why that body has not yet been established is because we had changing governments. We did not see stability, political or government stability. What we're now seeing currently is that everybody seems to be on the same page, in the sense there is more unity. There is less, there is effort to minimize opposition. But does that mean that we will finally see an independent body? Maybe not. I think it was probably, there was more chance of having an independent body back then compared to now. We will see a body. It's great. This 2000 this December 2024 act should have received a lot more press coverage than it did. It's great. But if you read the act itself, it's just laying down a plan, a master plan, nothing concrete, which Azhar Saab spoke in very detail about. So we may or may not see an authority, given how our history has been. We've gone back. In terms of progress, amongst many other aspects and sectors in the country, this sector has not, as you said, it's been delayed. It hasn't seen the progress and implementation we should. Maybe we will, but to what extent will that body be independent? And how can that body be independent? It can be independent if it comprises representatives from the government, from the public, and a neutral party. So a lot can be done, but it all comes down to the will to sit on a table together, to think in the best interest of the country and its citizen, and to keep differences aside, and to please finally move ahead and progress as a country, because there's so much potential and we could have done. No point in looking back, but there's a lot we can do and we should do.
Certainly, Minan, that everyone wish to be or on the same page, and considering the mutual benefits and the mutual respect, and definitely there are a lot of efforts are being done as well. So Ghulam Sarmin, just to connect with the previous discussion, what Sahar said just now, is that having a superior body which basically can oversight the law enforcement agencies, and correlating our discussion with the digital nation bill, there is a mention of the National Digital Committee as well. So such committees and such bodies, um, if government considered to define, will it help to legislate and give an oversighting responsibilities as well?
Yes, certainly. It is a usual practice that overall the enforcement actually has to pass through the test of how good an enforcement has been altogether. And there are then different mechanisms or different bodies which can actually take care of this aspect. And first and the foremost thing, yeah, am I audible?
Yes, very much. Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So the first and the foremost forum that can actually monitor or that can actually handle the performance of the legislative bodies themselves is the judicial system, right? So we have a judicial system in place, so we can, and that system, by virtue of our constitution, has the power to actually evaluate, or for that matter, assess the performance of enforcement agencies, which are actually responsible for these kind of changes or these kind of legislation. Then certainly, within our constitutional setup, I mean, Parliament has powers, and Parliament certainly has apparatus in place in the form of legislative committees, actually, right? So we can use those for us as well. However, it it is it is mandatory that those structures or those committees must have the desirable or the requisite capacity to actually, judge the performance of law enforcement agencies. Then there are certain international standardization or international best practices based auditing and compliance checking mechanisms, which can be mandated, and that can again be mandated through law for such enforcement agencies. And their frequency can be set up as such that the performance measurement or the performance assessment of such enforcement agencies becomes mandatory on them. It gives a level of frequency where the refinement on the performance can be addressed with definitive, time lags, and it becomes part of the organizational history of that, enforcement agency, and the agency actually takes care of its operations and procedures in a much better way. And other mechanism could be the oversight from independent think tanks or independent, bodies or independent groups of citizens, for example, who have the specific or a mandated interest onto keeping an eye on the enforcement related mechanisms and enforcement related performance of such enforcement agencies, and those can also play a role of a watchdog on these kind of elements. So these are actually the mix of activities that can be adopted. However, I must maintain one fact that we actually require help and prudence at all levels of legislative, journey. So, one, we need rightful regulations or rightful legislation, so that goes without saying. But on the other hand, we need a lot of help actually and a lot of helping hands to make the enforcement right, to make the enforcement journey full of pooled in efforts, pooled in wisdom, as well as kind of share responsibility, if not the accountability. So the accountability should be or must be let alone for the organization which is responsible for this. However, for the enforcement and for the overall maturity on the enforcement processes, certainly we need a lot of capacity and a lot of support in order to extend that capacity of that particular apparatus in place. So these are some of the areas which we need to take care of, and it is not going to happen through a conventional wisdom or through a die hard kind of regulatory or a mandatory kind of processes or the regulatory and mandatory kind of the procedures or the legislation for that matter. So we need to open up more and more. We need to actually adapt to this vulnerability that we all be actually facing up if we are not going to pool in our joint wisdom and collaborative efforts altogether.
Certainly, like I mean, all the stakeholders have to come on the same page and exert the collaborative efforts to develop and the common consensus to enforce these technologies. So, Azhar Sab, just knowing the time factor as well, I mean, I would like to, at the end of the discussion, would like to request you if you could like please shed some light on the related standards, guidelines, on the frameworks which you think would be helpful to consider for the the corporates or government institutions to follow, or which have been used or followed in the other territories as well, from your experience, which may help them developing these kind of ethically aligned or compliant systems.
Okay, there is a long list of such standards only from ISO which can be adopted. The very first one is 37,000, ISO 37,000, which is
Why
about
not
governance.
42,001?
Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt you, but why not to start from ISO 42,001?
No, no, 42,001 comes much later.
Right,
42,001 itself is based on 37,000. So 37,000 is the basic standards which talks about governance, right?
right,
Now, on that, there are many standards which branch out of 37,000 and 37,001 and 37,002 and 30,000. So this series of 37,000 standards is basically for governance. Everything stems out of it. So,
right,
42001 is the governance or management of AI systems, right?
correct.
Now, if you look at the other series of standards, which is 38,000, ISO 38,000, which is about IT governance, wrongly called IT governance, should be technology governance actually. That also has two standards which deal with AI governance.
Right,
Now, then there are other standards like 38,500, which deals with data governance. Then there's about 30 standards that deal with data governance in detail, and that is the 8,000 series, ISO 8,000 series. Then there are there's the three or four other standards that deal with data privacy and data security. So all of these, in all, there will be about 80 or 90 standards that have to be considered for ensuring that the AI systems are being used properly.
right, right. Thank you so much. And um, um, we are reaching to the end of the discussion. So just quickly, would like to take a round on collecting, the very brief takeaways which we would like to give to our audience. Let's start from the Ghulam Sahab. Like, your final takeaways, please, but in few seconds, please.
Yeah, I mean, net, you see, we need to see a lot of developments on the legislative front. We need all the laws which are mandated by the digital environments in which we live in today. And we need these laws for two purposes: one, for our own people, and two, for actually making our interactions more simpler, as well as more trust oriented with other nations, as well as other regions of the world. We have started off with some of the legislation. However, legislation introduction is something that where we require a lot of capacity altogether, but then is also a case for the legislation enforcement as well. And co-working or collaborative working, actually, it is the way forward altogether. We need to help each and every entity of ours from various different sectors, not only to introduce the right legislation, but also to enforce them in a rightful manner. We need to improve upon our governance capacities as well. And last but not the least, we need to promote standardization altogether. And we need to actually, alongside the standardization, we need to promote the organizational capacity development at all levels and improvements in governance at all levels. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ghulam Sahab. Sahar, your final takeaway, please, very briefly.
My final, yes, my final takeaway is that we've lost a lot of time. We cannot afford to lose more time because we've seen brain drain, we've seen economic slowdown. All of this is interconnected. And Ghulam Saab mentioned a few points I had raised. The most important point is for everybody to act in good faith, for everybody to come together, sit on a table, and as Ghulam Saab said, work in the best interest of each and every department, and not just, it shouldn't be self-serving. So no law should be self-serving. no person who's responsible to implement the law should do it for self-serving purposes. And surveilling technology today, whatever we've spoken about, tomorrow, maybe that would become redundant because the world will be moving in a different direction. So we need to also keep ourselves up to date with what's happening in the world and ensure that we are
Right. I think still we have some connection challenges there. So, Azhar Sab, finally, your
A
final
few,
takeaway.
yeah, a few years ago in his book, Dr. Klaus Schwab has said that the fourth industrial revolution has had the biggest impact on humanity. I think AI will have a bigger impact than the fourth industrial revolution, and it has to be taken seriously. It has to be taken up at the cabinet level. Somebody has to be made responsible for AI in the long term, regardless of which government comes and which government goes. So there has to be policy and there has to be strategy. There has to be implementation at the highest level, regardless of changes in the government. That is my final recommendation.
Thank you,
Thank you.
thank you so much, and thank you all, and by for sharing. Very insightful. Discussion was there, and we have actually very dive deep as well into the ethical dilemmas of the evolving surveillance technologies. We discuss about the system related components. Azhar Saab mentioned about the golden rules for developing such systems more reliably to ensure the transparency and fairness as well. And of course, we brought a very strong aspect of the legal aspect as well by enforce or emphasizing this fact, like we need to enhance the awareness within the public about the personal rights, and to ensure that all such systems have capability to collect the consents as well, and it should not be allowed to use their personal data of the public without a proper consent. With that thing, man, thank you so very much for attending this session today, and as a usual practice, we'll be bringing more relevant and interesting topics in the future. And at the end, thank you so very much, Ghulam Saab, Azhar Saab, and Barrister Sahar, for sharing your insightful, views and your knowledge and experiences. Thank you so very much. Have a
thank
nice day
you.
ahead.
Thank
It was
you.
a
Thank you so
pleasure and
much.
thank